Senator, thank you for being here and welcome to New Mexico in Focus.
It's great to be here.
Anytime I am talking to a lawmaker about a piece of legislation that they have sponsored, the real question that I want to get at is, what problem were you trying to fix with that law? So I'd like to wind the clock back just a bit. Give me a little bit of the landscape of how police certification and the accountability system statewide were working back in the day. What were you trying to fix with Senate Bill 19 in 2023?
So we looked at some very old structures. The Law Enforcement Academy was attached to DPS, director appointed by the governor.
Safety, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So we were looking at very old structures. The Law Enforcement Academy was part of Department of Public Safety. Its director was appointed by the gov, and it did three things. It trained the officers and set the tone for other local law enforcement academies. It dealt with certifications, theoretically suspending or revoking licenses of police officers and deputies, and also came up with the training curriculum. So we looked at that, and it was just very archaic. It was inefficient. There was not a lot of things happening. It was reporting was horrible. There was really no accountability. So over the course of 3 years, we changed the laws and we created two new agencies: the Standard and Trainings Council to come up with a modern curriculum for police, and also a certification board, similar to the bar in terms of you can graduate law school, but you're not a member of the bar until you take the test and answer questions. So that way the Law Enforcement Academy is not the bad guys. They do the training, they're the good guys, and then the certification board deals with misconduct allegations and theoretically can suspend or revoke a person's license to be a police officer.
One of the things that happened with Senate Bill 19 was you created some separation. You created some independence for that board. It's no longer in the DPS structure. You went so far as to include a definition in that law of administratively attached. Senator, what does administratively attached mean in this context, and why was that important for you to bake into the law?
It's very important that these agencies are independent. So, as you know, state government is you have the secretary, you have the department, you have divisions and bureaus underneath the governor and the secretary. Administratively attached is essentially independent. It usually has a board that hires an executive director. So there's a dozen or so agencies, and you're attached simply for clerical support, budget support, auditing, things of that nature. But when we administratively attached these two agencies to the Department of Public Safety, it didn't happen that way. They're not independent as of now.
And we will get to some of that in due course. But it sounds to me like part of what you were trying to get away from was a reporting structure where the cabinet secretary oversaw the folks trying to do that accountability work. You wanted to get away from that.
Correct. It's not part of the executive branch. It's independent. There's nobody putting the thumb on the scale. We want them loyal to the law. We want them to professionalize policing and deputizing in this state so that police officers prioritize their profession, their professional license over their buddy or their agency. So they're not just an APD cop, they are a police officer employed by the city of Albuquerque.
Gotcha. So the first sign of trouble in paradise that I saw with this new structure that you had set up was in January of 2025. Source New Mexico published a story based on a leaked email from then board CEO Joshua Calder. He was alleging interference, the type of which you had tried to get away from when you crafted the law. Were you aware that there was static before that story published?
Not so much. We knew that it was slow going in terms of appointing the board members. Then the board members hire a CEO. Calder would have been fantastic if he would have stayed. And then Calder hires his staff. This is an agency. It's not just a volunteer board. Mm-hmm. And then when the email hit and the misconduct allegations were made public, it was just very unfortunate that he was not able to keep that job.
What was your reaction when you read that email from him to the board saying, I'm getting interference from Cabinet Secretary Jason Bowie. He's not letting me do my job. You, as the person who sponsored that bill, how did you take that?
Just very frustrating that was happening. Very frustrating that they weren't following the letter of the law. And so we went into a legislative session that year, soon thereafter, and we were trying to fix some stuff, but it was just, there was too much animosity, and it was difficult to pass a bill that session.
Okay. Among the sources of friction that we learned after reading that source story and the email that it was sort of built around was that Secretary Bowie did not want Mr. Calder and the board investigating citizen complaints against officers. It was Bowie's perspective that what they should be doing is just focusing on allegations that come from the law enforcement agency itself. I wonder, when you wrote the bill, did you intend for the board to be able to investigate complaints from everyday folks?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the whole point. I mean, in a perfect world, you get an email the next day when you get pulled over and how did I do? You know, like when a plumber comes to your house. We didn't put that in statute because it was unnecessary. The Law Enforcement Academy dealt with private complaints. But I think when there was some high profile officers that were complained about, then this new policy was invented that we only take complaints from police officers.
And I want to specify one of those in a moment, but why was it important to you that citizen complaints be allowed to be investigated in addition to complaints from their employing agencies?
I mean, that's the whole point. Every police officer in the state is a government employee. You have the right to petition your government. And so to complain to the agency and then the agency does nothing, you know, we want democracy to prevail. We want these government officials to be held accountable. And frankly, a lot of the complaints may be frivolous and doesn't deserve higher scrutiny, but a citizen complaining about its government official is paramount to democracy, in my opinion.
Gotcha. One of those cases specifically, you had mentioned some high-profile officers. I think a lot of my viewers will be familiar with Police Chief Harold Medina, who was the APD chief at the time. He'd been involved in an automobile accident, and a city councilor, Luis Sanchez, filed a complaint with the Law Enforcement Academy Certification Board. That seemed to stick in Bowie's craw and create some static between him and Calder. Do you remember it that way?
Apparently, that was the first one that triggered this invented policy of citizen complaints. Mm-hmm. So Harold Medina, ushered APD through the DOJ process, is very well respected in the law enforcement community, and so that complaint was not dealt with like every other complaint.
Gotcha. I want to move to another policy, and I think you may be able to break some news here on the show this week. I got to say that during my 20 years covering the criminal justice beat as a reporter, I was always frustrated with the old system prior to your bill that I was not able to get information about police misconduct investigations from the old board. So needless to say, when I read Nick Gilmore's story in the Santa Fe New Mexican a couple of months ago, saying that law enforcement agencies, in the course of trying to make a hiring decision, also weren't able to get information from the board. And then I learned later that the officers themselves, the targets of these misconduct investigations, they're not able to get information from the board. This new policy had developed for like hardcore secrecy. I wonder, did you intend for that level of confidentiality when you wrote the bill?
No, certainly not. Certainly not. Particularly for the officers. One of the criticisms of the old inefficient way of doing things was that officers were held in limbo for a year or two, not knowing if they're going to lose their license or whatnot.
So, not even knowing sometimes if they were being investigated.
Right. And so we want transparency. We created in the statute a database. If somebody is suspended or revoked, it's public information. That if a chief is hiring somebody who, from another town, they know some of the history. A license is a permission to have a particular job. This is an incredibly difficult job. Not everybody's made to be a police officer. It's not their bad if they can't do that job. But yeah, the intent was that internal affairs and work product and interviews and things of that nature were made public, but the actual allegations and the fact that the complaint exists, the fact that someone is suspended or revoked, that needs to be public.
Gotcha. It was based on a legal interpretation. My understanding is by an attorney at the New Mexico Department of Justice. I want to read you a little passage from the statute that he was basing this interpretation on. It says, "Internal affairs and other investigation documents provided to or developed by the board for use in a certification case shall remain confidential." How should that be interpreted, and do you think the law needs to be tweaked?
It should be interpreted for investigative documents, post the initial allegations or the fact that they exist in the first place. But yeah, when we do revisit this statute, we will make that much more clear. It's, I'll take full responsibility. It's my bill. It's not an intellectual exercise writing these bills. It's sausage, and we try to get the tastiest sausage on the books. But it is disappointing that was interpreted that way. It's my understanding. I was at the meeting last week, and officers' names. So I was at the certification board meeting last week, and the agenda did have officers' names. So I think the board's going to revisit that initial interpretation. But to me, the key words is, and I argue the policy, the words is investigative documents provided or developed, not the initial documents.
I see. Okay. Let's get viewers up to speed on the current state of play at the board. Just in the last couple of weeks, the aforementioned Mr. Calder has filed a lawsuit against the Department of Public Safety and Secretary Jason Bowie. Brian Koss, the former deputy director of the Law Enforcement Academy, has filed a lawsuit that is eerily similar to Mr. Calder's. The allegations include violations of the State Whistleblower Protection Act, misappropriation of funds, retaliation by Bowie and others at DPS. I'm certainly not going to ask you to comment on the specifics of ongoing litigation, but I wonder how all of that smoke surrounding this entity strikes you more broadly.
Well, it's unfortunate that litigation had to transpire, but I'm glad it did, given the frustration of the two plaintiffs in this situation. In a perfect world, these administrative agencies have their own bank account, their own autonomy, their own ability to function under the statute, and it just simply has not happened. And it's not just the executive, the LFC, the Legislative Finance Committee, they don't necessarily love administrative agencies. We do as policymakers because sometimes that's what's necessary to produce good government. So there has been, to put it lightly, a lot of growing pains in developing these independent agencies.
Gotcha. And the misappropriation of funds piece, I want to just kind of zero in on that for a moment, if I may. You have had some questions yourself about the way the money works for the Law Enforcement Academy Certification Board. You dashed off a letter to Secretary Bowie earlier this month, and I'm going to quote from that letter. What you said was, "The monumental duties that these two independent agencies are tasked with still have not come to fruition." You closed the letter by asking, "What part of administratively attached don't you understand?" What specific concerns were you wanting Secretary Bowie to address?
Well, the statute's clear, and we even put a special provision in DPS outlining the administratively attached agencies. There's a statute dealing with administratively attached. These agencies are administratively attached. We didn't point to this statute in the bill, but I think the Department of Public Safety views these employees as Department of Public Safety employees. They're employees of the certification board. And so the certification board should have its own line item in the budget, which it doesn't. I believe it did the first year, but does not now, which is our bad. It should have its own bank account, its own ability to spend and track its own money. The budget is presented through the department, but is totally under the control of these administratively attached agencies, and that has not happened.
You were not wanting DPS to have control over the budget for this board. And the statute, as I read it, does create a situation where it should have its own bank account. Am I misreading that?
It should. No, it has to be independent. Theoretically in the same office space or down the hall, but it needs to be independent from DPS to get the structure right, get the institution right. I think every sheriff that the point is to get the institution right, to get the incentives right within those institutions. Every sheriff I speak to looks forward to these agencies to be fully developed. They should have their own bank account, but at the same time, administratively or bureaucratically, they have to have their own agency codes within the budget process. So what I'm hoping to do is, I've got agreement from the executive and legislative finance leaders that they will act as if they have their own administrative codes in this upcoming budget cycle. So hopefully House Bill 2 next January will have its own individual line items for these agencies, because the budgets were increased, but when you look at it on paper, the DPS budget was increased And I'm saying, hey, that money should go to these agencies.
Which has sort of created the landscape in which some of these allegations may have arisen. I wonder, has Secretary Bowie responded to the letter? Have you had a chance to speak with him?
No, I haven't spoke to the Secretary just yet, but I've learned a lot since that letter, and it's more difficult than it seems to create these agency codes and create these agencies as independent with their own bank account.
Gotcha. I want to ask one more question before I let you out of here. What else will you be keeping an eye on, as it looks like there are some problems with these entities that you helped to get set up with your legislation? Are there additional legislative fixes beyond cleaning up that language that we spoke to a moment ago? What else can you do as a state lawmaker to get done what you wanted here, which was to have a truly independent board that's in charge of licensure, essentially, and police accountability statewide?
There's a lot of work still to be done. These can be model examples for the rest of the nation, the way we do it here in New Mexico, the way it needs to be done. So we have 6 months to educate both gubernatorial candidates and get the new governor on board. But I think the key is with the training curriculum. Our statutes are so old. They're from the 80s and 90s. Police officers and deputies need 40 hours every 2 years, and they literally take a week off and just sit there for 40 hours receiving some type of training. Training should be ongoing. It should be weekly, monthly. It should be video training in class, on the field. You know, it should be 200 to 400 hours a year. And so to get there, it's a difficult task because we need to take out the statutory requirements which have handcuffed the training module and let the training council do its job. So I think if we get confidence in these two agencies, we get good leadership on the training council, they can hire the best and brightest from throughout the country, theoretically international policing, and we could have the best trained police officers and deputies in the country right here in the state of New Mexico.
I think that a lot of people would look forward to that being the case. Senator Maestas, thank you so much for helping us understand what's going on over there.
Thank you very much for having me.